Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for attending our Ask the Expert call. Today's call is on 5 steps to partner with your organization to alleviate your finance pains. Our speaker today is Dan Fletcher from NetSuite. My name is Angela Tice, and I'm the Northeast Regional Director and National Membership Chair of the CFO Leadership Council. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we actually get started. You might have noticed your lines are muted, and that's so that there's no distractions while our speaker is talking. We do encourage your questions and comments, so please feel free to use the questions area to communicate. We welcome your interaction, and we really want to make sure that your needs are addressed. So please feel free to ask those questions as we go through the presentation. I will monitor that area, and we're going to save some time at the end so that we can address your questions. So please put them in there, and as I said, we'll make time at the end so that we can address your questions or any comments that you may have. If you are a member of the CFOLC, you will receive 1 CPE for today's webcast. In order to receive CPE, you must answer 3 of the 4 polling questions. So I will interrupt the presentation in order to bring those to you. If you are wondering how to become a member of the CFOLC, you can get in touch with me after the webcast. We do have 2 levels of involvement. And the good news about that, if you are not a member and you do join today, you will qualify for CPE. There is a survey that follows the presentation. NASBA, who allows us to give you CPE, requires that we send a follow-up survey to you immediately following the presentation. So please do give us your feedback. It really does help us ensure that we're delivering the right information to you. Basically, that is the housekeeping, so I don't want to take too much time from our speaker. So with that, Dan, I'm going to hand it off to you, and I'll let you introduce yourselves to our audience.
Thanks, Angela. And just one brief correction there. I'm actually the CFO of Host Analytics, not NetSuite, although we'd like to be about the size of NetSuite, and we're headed there. Actually, NetSuite is one of our key partners. We sit on top of them, so no sweat though.
That. I am so sorry. I don't even know how that happened.
No problem. It's a busy Tuesday. So we will actually touch a bit on Host Analytics a bit later, but that is not the meat of my presentation today. So listen, thank you for taking care of that housekeeping, and good morning, or for the East Coasters or those elsewhere, good early afternoon. So look, I'm excited to chat finance and accounting pain points with you today, which is a little bit ironic, right, to be excited about chatting about things that drive us all crazy. But more importantly, we're going to talk about concepts and solutions for solving those pain points, which is why I'm looking forward to it. So I really want to thank you all for joining us today. I know everyone is really busy, and whenever I'm asked to speak to finance and accounting folks, I'm always frustrated when the people who take the time out of their busy schedule to attend a conference or log into a webinar, I'm always frustrated when they don't receive CPEs. So although 1 is not 10, I want to thank Letty Rodriguez of my marketing team here at Host and Angela's team for ensuring that you all get a CPE for the session today. You know, in my opinion, continuing professional education isn't just maintaining knowledge and awareness of our ever-evolving accounting standards and guidance, although that's certainly a part of it. So what we'll discuss today is somewhat on the more human side of the business, and in my eyes is of critical importance to finance and accounting professionals, and I hope you find some value in our time together. So I guess all that goes to say, please do answer 3 or all of them. There are 4 polling questions. I think they'll be interesting for us to parse, and they're very related to what we're discussing. So normally the moderator would read my bio, and what I did was I asked Angela to just allow me to speak to my bio today. I think it'll give you all a flavor of how I'm approaching, or some insight into how I'm approaching this discussion around finance pain points. So I started my career in audit, like I'm sure many of you on the webinar did. I was with PwC in Chicago in the summer of 2007, and those of you who were not born in the mid-90s probably remember that was just as the financial crisis was beginning to send, little rumblings through the system, little signals and leading indicators. And my clients were the big banks and hedge funds. So as you can imagine, I learned a lot over the next few years. truly trial by fire and some scary but very informative times. So after getting that well-rounded view of the financial system in crisis at PwC, I pivoted into the investment industry with Allstate Investments, the asset manager of the Fortune 500 insurance giant, and eventually moved into a middle market private equity firm, Sterling Partners in Chicago, which focused on healthcare, education, and business services investing, like I said, in the middle market. But ultimately, through a desire to not only be an investor, but also an operator, I cut my teeth with Alvarez & Marsal's private equity performance improvement practice for 4.5 years. And in that role, I filled a variety of interim roles, primarily in finance, but also in some operations. I was a VP of marketing at one point, interesting days for me. And then ultimately re-entered private equity in June of 2018 with Vector Capital, middle market technology investors. And from time to time, our operating team, which I'm on, steps into C-suite interim roles in our portfolio, which is how I end up here speaking to you today as Chief Financial Officer of Host Analytics, one of our more recent investments at Vector Capital, and one that we are super excited about. So I tell you all of that, because my current role is unique. It balances the point of view of investors and ownership. And that path, while it's super non-traditional, it's given me deep experience with many different finance teams and businesses, among them GripWrite, Serta Simmons, American Greetings, Goldman Sachs, JD Power, Citadel, State Farm. So these are just some recognizable logos. And what this means is I've had a front row seat to the pain points of all. I was counting them up, and it's almost a bit scary, but over 80 finance teams across different industries, company sizes, market conditions for sure in my early career, and geographies. And what I've done is I've used that opportunity to partner with those teams to gather insights and patterns on challenges, and more importantly, how the successful teams solve them. And so that was a bit about me, and I'm controlling the slide deck here, and I forgot to change it, but walked you through that. So when I was asked to speak about 5 steps to solve finance pain points, I sat down, put pen to paper, and I approached it from a couple different angles. Do we want to approach some of the biggest pain points that I think most folks would have experience with out on the webinar, as in tackle the biggest fish with the most commonality, or do I want to look at the 5 steps that would solve the most problems? What ultimately I landed on is, using either of those targeted manners, it would really benefit from more than just an hour-long discussion over a webinar. I mean, we're talking workshops where we'd want to outline problems and then talk about specific process and steps and tools to solve them. So I'm kind of taking a different angle at this. If you think about it, there are technology tools that could solve. You're looking at the screen now here, and I've got 5 pain points. And I'm going to touch on them in a second, but you're looking at certain tools like Host Analytics that could solve for elements of all of these pain points. And then there are also management systems and structural partnership adjustments that can solve for these as well. Maybe not the whole of them, maybe not 100% of each of them or any of them, but certainly, again, more than an hour-long discussion. So what I decided to do was take a different approach. And I started with outlining what I felt were my 5 most common pain points throughout my career from a finance perspective. And I've got those up on the screen now. And after I go through these, I'm going to hope that you guys will respond to a poll and help me understand which of these that you all out there find you struggle with the most. So just running down them, I'm not going to drain the slide, but limited resources, right? So the idea is that the more cash that we have, the less problems that we have. But because there's restrictions on that, finance and accounting have to make the decisions to allocate that capital, and the people who we consider human capital, right, to match the strategic objectives of the board and the shareholders. And there are often competing agendas, and it's a real struggle, especially as you get up to more senior roles in finance. But certainly the business partners down near the bottom of the org chart in finance, or particularly FP&A, are often partnered with leaders of functional areas such as marketing and HR. And in that role, often have to make tough decisions or help finance represent the right logic and rigorous analytical thinking that required to lead a CMO down the right path on their budget or investment decisions. The next is compliance. I mean, this one is just obvious. You know, there's not only a liability for CFOs and finance leaders out there representing financial statements to the market, but many other requirements that we're responsible for just pristine compliance to across statutory and audit and tax. Everybody knows about Starbucks and some of the other guidance and requirements. There are industry-specific compliance. There are covenant requirements for those who hold debt. Compliance, as you know, can be a real pain point. Moving on, the need for speed, and I put there perfection, because if you go really fast and you get it wrong, obviously we all know how that goes, and it's not well, especially in the boardroom. You know, I put here, this is something I hear a lot. It can feel like finance and accounting are only noticed when we make a mistake. So we can deliver for 18 quarters on time and flawless, and then if on the 19th we bust a number or deliver late, you know, then we hear from the key leadership across the organization, and in fact up to the board. So look, the expectation is perfection and speed, and that can be a real headache and a pain point, one that we constantly struggle against. Internal politics, this is somewhat related to limited resources, but I think discrete enough to be separated here, because it's not just about allocating limited resources. It's being a gatekeeper. It's managing approvals. It's reporting good and bad news that drives accountability and holds folks accountable. You know, we're right in the middle of that, and it's a challenging position to navigate. And then finally, down on the bottom, and again, this is somewhat related to one of these up here, I'd say probably two, need for speed and compliance, but separate enough to be its own thing. Data, we're always wrangling it. We're always struggling to get it fast enough, to make sure it's clean, to make sure it's the right level of granularity. You know, are the systems providing it correctly? Is the mapping right? All the little headaches that we partner at times with IT on, and certainly both the finance and accounting sides of the business often spend what I would truly describe as an excessive amount of time wrangling the data, which is a very, very big pain point. So I am curious to hear from you folks. Angela, could you pull up the poll, and could we get a pulse check with the team out there?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm going to launch it right now. And of course, the question here is, what is your biggest finance and accounting pain point? So if you would answer these quickly, that would be great, and I can give that information to Dan. I'm just going to collect it. I'm waiting. They're answering quickly for us, so that's a wonderful thing.
Oh, that's great. Like we said, the need for speed.
Exactly. We're getting there. And you gave them a lot of different answers that they could give you, so this is terrific.
I was trying, Angela, to stick to the number 5 in some form.
Yeah, I know, and I so appreciate you. Dan has worked hard on this presentation, so we're really, really so appreciative. Okay, Dan, I'm going to share this with you now. I'm going to close the poll. Closing the poll right now. And I'm going to share it with our audience as well. And the poll results look like this. Limited resources. Okay. Yeah, you do not see that, right?
I do, but run through them for our group.
Excellent.
Okay, so it looks like limited resources and need for speed and perfection are the leaders in the clubhouse. And internal politics, interestingly, coming in at second after the tie for first, or I guess third. Data being the least, compliance coming after internal politics. So this is about what I expected, which is that these are 5 issues that are each important, and not one of them is significant enough to even get over 50%. So this is what I meant when I said I think we need to take a different approach today with our limited amount of time to tackling these. And so the way I think about this, I'm going to advance the slide here. There we go. Is that there's no one solution to solve these pain points. I mean, I really believe that. Guys, I assure you I tried. And like I said, each of those pain points, I think, requires multiple resolution actions. Look, in my experience, it's often some combination of people, technology, and process. And that should surprise absolutely no one on this call. But again, it takes more time than a simple now 45 minutes. But I do think there's one focal bucket, and this is a favorite focal bucket of mine, and I've given talks on it before, that if attended to correctly, really sets the foundation for an evolution of finance and accounting that resolves a significant and material portion of those 5 pain points that I highlighted, but also many others. And what is that? It's culture. And I know that very often the business community speaks about culture and I think even fetishizes the word. And like I like to say, almost fetishizes it to the extent that it loses the true meaning. It becomes kind of a buzzword that's used in puff pieces that for us finance folks, it really fails to link culture to business outcomes. I mean, that's what we're looking for is all this squishy talk about culture. Tell me, how does it matter for my budget? How does it matter for the bottom line? How does it matter for process? And I believe a lot of our current discourse about culture, it misses that point about connecting it to business outcomes and really connecting it to the reality on the ground and the big picture. And look, I think everybody from Yahoo Finance to Bloomberg is guilty at times of a lack of substantial discussion around the topic. And like I said, with my experience over call it 80 plus finance organizations, the link between broken or faulty culture and negative business outcomes, it became crystal clear. It's the biggest piece of pattern that I recognize, and it's so interwoven with pain points, not just the 5 that I tried to outline at the top of my list. And really, very importantly, a lack of focus on culture doesn't mean that you don't have culture. What I like to say is that you do, every organization does. It just means that you don't control it. And almost more importantly, you don't understand it, much less control it. And so what am I talking about when I use the word culture? I'm talking about, in my mind, 5 key pillars, and they're listed on the right of the slide that you're looking at down under the whiteboard there. I've defined them as purpose, values, structure, people, and commitment. And when these are done right, I think finance drives a culture that generates very material positive outcomes for your business, not just in morale and speed and quality data, but in the bottom and top lines. In fact, it can show up in your growth trajectory. So I want to very quickly just talk about kind of table set about where we were, sort of, call it in the last 10 years. Organizations have evolved at different speeds and certainly different industries have, but I think much of this will resonate with you. And I want to do this before we talk about how a CFO can underwrite his or her company's culture, because in order to kind of understand where we can go, we need to understand what has changed. So I'm going to buzz through this because it's not going to be very new to you folks, but it is a table setter. Very obviously, a CFO's responsibilities were often defined as maintaining regulatory and statutory compliance and reporting, analyzing and reviewing financial data, reporting financial performance, certainly preparing budgets and monitoring expenses and cash flow, and of course, all the processes that underlie these functions, so payroll, T&E approvals, etc. And I want to be clear, these are ultra critical responsibilities. I'm not denigrating them in any shape or form. And if they're not executed at a high level, the business is, of course, at serious risk. But I'm sure that many of you today would view that list and think, yes, agreed, critical, but what about the rest of the work I'm doing on a daily basis? And so what I mean by that is, well, let's just think about how that fits into the topic of culture. And I think the best way to do that is through a story. So I'll jump back to my consulting days. And so I was advising the CFO of a roughly $3 billion manufacturing company of consumer goods. So this was one of the bigger kind of upper middle market businesses that I've worked with. And while working on their budget process, and this CFO had a highly complex business. Several key issues, they came to light. So the business was multinational, and it had a complex network. I think of over about 300 distributors, many suppliers, 30 plus plants, call it 20 plus currencies, and it had recently completed a large acquisition. And not to mention, they had a very demanding private equity owner. So the organization ran on one of the largest enterprise ERP systems, and it was really great for the manufacturing ops, but it did not have a reporting forecasting module. So no EPM software solution like Host sitting on top of it, no internal module in the ERP, nothing that streamlined a collaborative budgeting and planning process, which is our topic in this story. They, of course, ran that process in Excel. I'm sure many of you have been in situations similar to that and can relate. Now, the finance team was large, but all the departments, all the functions, they did not have a dedicated finance partner during the process, during the budget process. They had sort of standard departmental templates that were sent out to the cost pool owners. They were, I would say, laboriously completed and sent back to finance, of course, over email. Now, the finance team, of course, given that process, spent the majority of their time coaching the managers on how to fill out the templates, which often didn't go well, and then rolling up the data and working through a lack of comparable data across departments, data entry and formula errors. Anyone who's run through one of these processes knows how quickly these templates get broken. Even if you lock them, someone figures out how to unlock them, and there's a row inserted, and that breaks the sum ifs and the VLOOKUPs and the index matches. It's a deep, muddy jungle of spreadsheet hell is how I would describe it. And so, of course, this CFO was frustrated. He wanted the team to spend time on helping the managers get the most bang for their buck in terms of their budget. So running business case and scenario analysis. He wanted them to seek cost savings opportunities and repurpose those cost savings into investment across functions to drive value creation. I mean, this is not your classic CFO, closing the book stuff. This is the modern CFO duties of being a business partner. And he wasn't able to do that, and his org wasn't able to do that. And by the way, those deficiencies were just on the cost structure, not even the top line element of the budget. So like I said, that scenario, if you don't have the cold sweats right now, it's still probably relatable to many of you. And look, certainly an EPM solution such as Host would have been a huge help in resolving many of those issues. But the way I see it, culture is also a key issue. And that's what I want to discuss today. I want to discuss how finance can impact culture. And then I want to revisit at the end of it how culture driven by finance could have contributed to solving this CFO's pain points. And of course, if you think back to the poll we did, we'll have echoes of how culture could solve those as well. And so changing the slide here, back to those 5 pillars that I've discussed, purpose, values, structure, people, and commitment. I just want to run through them very quickly. I'm keeping an eye on time, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. Angela, do I have to pause at any moment for any of the additional polls? Could you just let me know so I don't go off the rails?
I'd be happy to do that. I think once you get through this slide, we'll poll after the next one. How's that sound?
That sounds great. So the reason that I outlined these 5 as my 5 cultural pillars is I think they cover and lay the foundation. I'm going to buzz through them very quickly. Purpose. This is it all starts. It all starts here, to be honest. And the way I think about it is purpose is really your vision and your mission statement. It's where culture starts. It establishes, to state the obvious, the purpose of your organization. And you would be surprised, but I'd say about less than 50% of the businesses that I've worked with had an active mission statement. But when truly embedded in a business, you can align employees, ownership, suppliers, customers, the entire ecosystem in which you operate. I actually wanted to provide here an example of our mission statement at Host. And you'll notice here what I've done is I've got the tagline, it's the building blocks of our culture, and then I've got a cornerstone or a building block over there. So who says finance can't put together fancy imagery? I'm staring at my marketing team right now. And so our mission statement at Host is to give finance the tools they need to lead the evolution of business. And everyone in my organization, from finance to the coders to the closers, know that that's our mission statement. And when they come into work every day, they understand that's what we're all about. We're about providing finance the tools they need to lead the evolution of business. And I think that gets us aligned when we're in deep conversations about resourcing, about hiring. It gets us aligned. Hey, does it help us? Does it help us deliver the tools? You know, we think about that when we say, all right, we want to attend this conference. And that conference, it has to fit into our mission statement and make sense in that regard. I'm jumping back. Yep.
Yes, I was just going to say you went back and forth, but I think that the polling question that I have fits in perfectly here if you don't mind me launching it.
You're right. I totally forgot. Thank you. Let's launch it.
Absolutely. So here we go, audience. The question is, what does your company's mission statement look like? And I think these answers are so funny. Though they can be
so
sad.
The way I structured these guys and gals out there is the first one, what mission statement? That means you don't have one. The second is you think you do, but you'd honestly have to check the website. The third one is you've got one, but it's awful. And the fourth one is, you know, like I believe ours at Host, which is, yes, it's great and we all know it and it actually guides us. And looks like I misspelled you there. Forgot to tick and tie that one. I'm eager to see the results of this one.
Yes, I'm going to share those with you in just a moment. We're collecting the last few people. All right, looks like people have put in their answers, so here we go.
Oh, that's really good news, but
yeah,
it's very close to the benchmark I gave you, which is about half the businesses I worked with had a really good and strong mission statement. So what I would say is big opportunity for the 10 of you who don't have one. And although we lost it up there, I think the 22 who were slightly better than that just had to check to see if it was actually existent on the website. So that makes 32% of you, roughly a third, who have a really big opportunity to materially influence the culture of your business by introducing to the executive team a conversation which is, hey, we all should be rowing the same direction. And how can we even hope to do that if we haven't defined what we're showing up here for every day? So moving on to the second pillar here, which is core values, I think these are the center of the business's culture. If the mission statement establishes the purpose, the values are the day-to-day framework that guide decision making. And I think that's critical. And, the reason that I say that they can be different across the org, whereas the mission statement needs to be unified in one thing, as you'll have different values around different functions. But I would say the core values, they need to be tied to the mission statement. And what I've got up here is that R&D, they may not view stewardship of the business's assets as a core value, but finance knows it is and knows that the board would view it and the shareholders would view it as that. And perhaps sales doesn't really think about intelligent growth, they just think about growth. And perhaps their incentive comp isn't tied to intelligent growth. And so you establish these core values and they help guide day-to-day decision making. Moving on to structure, I would say a clear purpose and solid values, they'll fail without the proper structure to enable them. And this means that the leadership structure, the partnerships between functions, I talked about rewards and incentives, the tracking of outcomes, decision-making protocols, operational workflows, and policies. They all need to be linked to your purpose and your core values. And you can see now how this is starting to build pillar by pillar, something that could stand up to those operational challenges that we defined as pain points, not just for finance and accounting, but for the whole org. Moving on to the fourth pillar, it goes without saying that without the right people, all of the above will go to waste. And so I would say that when hiring, looking at talent management and training, they all need to be aligned and often can only be aligned by finance involvement with your mission statement, your core values, and then calibrated to suit your organizational structure. You think about those articles you read on Forbes, and what was missing to me is this is clearly a finance perspective on culture. You look across those first four pillars and you see integrity, stewardship. We're talking about stakeholders. We're talking about finance being centrally positioned to influence key elements of structure. We're talking about compensation and incentives. Some culture articulation out there might touch on buckets of that, but I feel like it's just so often much softer and about things like smiling and meetings, etc. So putting finance in this discussion, who is a gatekeeper and comes at it from a rigorous analytical angle, can build a different culture for better outcomes. And finally, I've got on here commitment, my fifth pillar. And what I would say is that it might appear to be a good candidate for a core value up there in my second pillar, but I struggled with this, but I think values will differ across industries. So speed might be a core value in a software startup, and deliberate decision making might be a core value in an oil refinery. Just different needs, different purposes, and therefore different core values. So I have commitment, which I believe needs to be visible and important in every culture, listed as a separate pillar. I think it is a cultural pillar because without consistent application and dedication to a focus on purpose, values, optimal structure, and your people, your culture will never reach its potential, and therefore it will never be linked to better business outcomes. Angela, any need to do a poll here?
I can do that, and then we have one more after this. So I'm going.
Okay, let's do that. Let's pause.
Okay, great. So this one was kind of what you were talking about a little while ago, but I think it still makes a lot of sense. The question is, which of these approaches do you view as likely most effective in solving the most F&A pain points? So collecting the responses. And then we'll just have one more after this one, Dan.
And I think some of these are getting cut off, folks, but what I would say is the second one that says raise incremental debt financing, more resources, less challenges. The third one is hire a reputable consulting firm that specializes in improving finance challenges. The fourth one is fairly obvious.
Yeah, and I think what happens there, so sorry, but it cuts it off. It only takes a certain amount. Technology, I love it when it works. Okay, I'm going to share this with everyone. It looks like everyone has voted or put in their answers. Interesting, right, Dan? Reset the culture.
So honest folks, I was not trying to lead the witness here. I had this one and I just missed it. I was trying to set the table, but I appreciate the vote of confidence, and I definitely agree. And this doesn't surprise me all that much, other than I thought maybe throwing sales under the bus would be a larger favorite. But yeah, so culture is a fundamental building block of the org. And if it's broken and finance doesn't have a seat at the table when developing it, you're going to see pain points bubble up across the organization. And these are not just the 5 pain points that I listed above, which are primarily finance pain points, but you'll have real issues around expense management across the business, real issues around attrition, real issues around inability to recruit, inability to enter new markets, things that materially move the needle at the board level. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to revisit that challenging scenario from my manufacturing friends. And I'm actually going to go back, if I can control this. I'm not great at controlling these slides, guys. This is a new tool. Okay, there we go. Back to my pillars. So let's just think about how to link these pillars to a better business outcome or a pain point solution in that poor CEO of the $3 billion consumer goods manufacturer. So the question is, of course, how could he have worked through the lever of culture to solve for some of the issues that I listed? We think about purpose. So a mission statement, and by the way, they had one, but it didn't include dedicated service to the customers, which would have made spending inordinate amounts of time in spreadsheets a non-starter. So the fact that you've got your CMO and your sales leaders and your customer service lead out there grinding in clunky Excel spreadsheets for weeks on end during the budget process, again, it would be a non-starter. If the idea is that we need to spend the bulk of our time, at least the front office folks need to spend the bulk of our time making sure our customers are happy, then that's just a no-go. And they would have immediately started looking for a solution, even if it cost more, a solution that would fulfill their purpose. From values, if the core values were speed and agility, again, this would have shined a very negative light on this process. It sounds like I'm stating the obvious here, but the conversation was being had only in finance about this process. And there were grumbles. But if it's part of the foundational culture, it becomes a very different discussion seen by different stakeholders who can really move the needle on finding a solution. From a structure standpoint, they had no finance dedicated business partners to the departments. So, that's a problem number one. Compensation linked to cost would have made the large finance group an issue, and an EPM solution would have enabled collaboration, gotten them out of spreadsheet hell. Moving on to people, I'm looking at my watch here. I don't want to miss out on the Q&A. Moving on to people, look, they would have needed to hire finance people who can partner with the org, who understand business, and who can demonstrate value to the managers. The way I describe that is not to say that you won't always have a strong need for folks in finance and accounting who are just number crunchers. That's what they want to do. That's their right speed. But you would also need to hire some folks who can get along well at a cocktail party and get the trust and build a rapport with your marketing, your sales, your HR leads. That's pretty key. And if your purpose and your mission and your values and your structure is all aligned the right way, then it's going to influence who finance hires. And you're going to start to see people who can be real partners with different segments of the org. And finally, commitment. I think if the culture had been reset there, the CFO would have then constantly communicated a commitment to this culture. And I'm not talking, folks, about being really kumbaya and having a CFO who sits there before every budgeting session and tells his or her team, remember our mission statement is serving our customers, and you need to remind the HR leader that when she's asking for incremental budget, that it's not serving the customer. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about having the right mindset, the right cultural mindset and framework for going out there and being aligned. So the idea is, yes, if it's hammered for days upon days and kind of woven into the fabric of the business that our customers are number one, then we're going to evaluate the HR technology tools that our leader is asking for over in that function and ask ourselves, does this fit into our mission statement? Or does allocating that to a better customer service portal handle that? When you have limited resources, again, one of our pain points, that culture can help set your true north. So that's what I think we could have done. Now, we didn't do that there. What we ended up doing, my mandate was much more related to establishing a better process, and we went with some technology and process solutions and also found some great folks to run it. But I checked in with that CFO about a year later, and they still had many pain points. I think the process issues were resulting from a bit of a break in culture. So in the interest of time, I want to try to wrap this up here. I think that there's no question that modern finance and CFO, in particular the CFO and leadership, are requested and mandated to partner with the CEO to do a whole bunch of exercises and activities that are far beyond the classic closing of the books. And, these include owning M&A, business intelligence, all that good stuff. And their team, which comes along for the ride, is always expected to work harder, faster, to be perfect, like I said, in the pain points, to do more with less, to have deeper and more immediate insight into the key drivers of the business. And like I outlined in that case study, to partner, to be true partners, collaborative with the rest of the org. And I think culture and finance driving culture can help us get there. I would be remiss if I didn't talk a bit about, you heard me echo throughout the conversation today about how technology can be a real partner to culture. It would sit in the structural, or that middle of my 5 pillars. With the right technology tools, not just host analytics, I'm biased, of course, but as Angela said up top, NetSuite is a great ERP, a great example of technology that we at Host partner with to really help implement the right structure, the right tools that underpin a culture of speed, agility, rigorous data compliance that solve for a whole bunch of finance pain points. It gets you out of a lot of the Excel hell and the long nights burning the midnight oil. Host is a leader in EPM. This isn't a sales webinar, so I'm not going to go into it, but happy to reach out to you all, or have you reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested in learning more. Angela, I think we have time now for some Q&A after our final poll.
Yes, so I'll do the final poll, and then I'll ask you some of the questions that I see are sitting in the questions area. So here's the poll. And it is, which of my 5 cultural pillars do you think you might consider for your business? So we'll give everyone just a moment to answer that, and I'll open up the questions in just a moment.
I have no idea which way you guys are going to go on this after seeing the mission statement voting.
Yeah. It will be interesting. It's getting there. Just get everybody to answer a little bit more quickly, and then I'll close the poll. I just want to make sure to give everybody enough time to do it and collect them.
Do submit some Q&A. I intentionally left some time here at the end so that we can have a discussion about this area, fill in some of the gaps that I may have left open.
Yeah, which I think will be great. Okay, I'm going to close this poll and share that. So 43% said structure, Dan.
That makes sense. Yep. Coming at it from a true finance perspective, we're often focused on process and incentives and tracking outcomes. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and folding in technology to that. There's obviously been a revolution in fintech, and that should come as no surprise to the folks on the call. So why don't we move on now to Q&A, Angela?
Okay, will do. So I know that there's a question in here because I saw it come through. And 1 second, I'm just going to get to it. 1 moment. Trying to pull it out. So sorry. Sometimes this happens to the area. Okay. So one of the questions, Dan, it says, does Dan suggest embedding finance team members into business units or a central finance team?
That's a great question. I know that's always people's reaction, but in this case, I mean, it's just not knee-jerk. It's complex, and I'm not going to try to squirm out of the answer, but I would say that it's both industry and business side specific. In small organizations, I think no doubt you want that central finance team. You will probably have a leaner team, and maybe individual members of that team are partnering with multiple business partners out there. You know, on my team, we kind of separated it. You've got someone who partners on FP&A, who partners with sales and marketing and customer service, and someone who partners more with the back office. And that's worked out really well. Now, in the example of the $3 billion consumer products industry, I mean, that was a very large and global org sliced by geography. And what we ultimately did there was we did embed individuals out in functions, not in geographies. We wanted to slice it a different way. And that embedded, for instance, we had a sales ops finance partner. We did not have a marketing partner. Actually, it was really more of a hybrid model, but the bigger functions who had the largest requirements in terms of finance, energy, and bandwidth and guidance did get their own business partner. I can also imagine that in specific industries where finance really needs to understand the nuances of those industries, that it might make sense to evaluate embedding them in those orgs, but in those departmental orgs. But I do, as I'm talking and thinking out loud here, I do question the efficiency of that, because then you always have dotted line reporting responsibility. And ultimately, if finance is going to be a driver of culture, you know, the question of who you actually report to influences a lot of what you're willing to stand for out in the business. And if you've got, for example, that individual embedded in sales, you know, you could have some experiences of what you might call going native, where that individual might get influenced by the culture of sales, which is by definition often focused on more short-term goals and perhaps not as focused on stewardship, where finance is focused on the long term and more aligned with the board and the ownership. So that was a bit of a meandering answer, but I do think it requires nuance and certainly depends on what business you're talking about.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'm sure that it sounded very thorough to me, so thank you for that. We do have a few more. The next one is actually about your company. Does host analytics make sense for smaller businesses, or is it cost prohibitive?
So certainly, you know, we've got a really great offering for all segments. The way we look at it is we've got an enterprise or kind of smaller corporate offering that would go, you know, kind of up to 50 million or even 100 million, depending on the industry. And then we've got a middle market solution that's your classic kind of 100 million up to, call it a billion, and our enterprise, which would be $1 billion above. And those have different cost structures, which would make sense, and also different product features and service levels. Many of our customers, sort of our sweet spot in terms of our current customer list, tends to be more in mid-market and enterprise businesses in terms of our logo count. And in particular, one of the reasons I would say it makes sense for smaller orgs is because they run lean. So what Host does is it sits on top of your ERP, extracts that data automated feed, and gets you out of Excel. So you're going to have automated reporting and streamlined budgeting and forecasting and reforecasting, KPI dashboards that aren't being spun up by your team, but instead are being spun up by the system, by Host Analytics. You know, there's an investment on the front end in mapping and getting your reporting to fit the org, and our team partners with you during the implementation to do that. But after that, I mean, in a small business, it arguably feels immediately more different than a large business, because your team can then spend more time partnering with the org and being value additive.
Thank you. So Dan, another question, kind of talking about culture. How would you recommend to start that conversation about culture with the E-staff to ensure that finance has a bigger role to play, especially in a company where the values are already established prior to you coming into the CFO role?
Sure. I mean, the concern there, of course, is that it looks a little weird for the CFO or finance leader to walk into the room and start talking about, soft skills and culture. It's probably that, finance and IT is where that conversation is least expected to originate. But what I would say is use rational and logical behavior. If you don't have a mission statement or core values, add it to the agenda and say, hey, look, recently have been continuing my professional education and some issues were raised. And because we don't have a mission statement, I think there's probably not of alignment around our purpose. If you ask someone in the elevator in the morning what we do, would they struggle to answer that question? I don't think it's controversial to say that that's probably an opportunity for improvement. If you do have them, like the question indicated, then, hey, check when they were last revisited. It presents the same opportunity. I would say that certain elements of purpose and values should never change, but a good example of something that may change is sustainability. So climate wasn't on many people's radar 30 years ago, so revisit it. I think it's kind of an annual discussion, in my opinion, when the executive leadership gets together for their annual offsite, talking about what we're all trying to do from a purpose and a core value standpoint. I don't think that's nerdy. I think that's silly if you don't do it. And look, if you're set on mission and values, lucky you're kind of at that stage where you can be more focused on structure, people, and commitment. And that's an easier conversation for the CFO to start and often a logical place where it originates to begin with.
Great. And kind of following up with that, and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, why do you think culture has traditionally been ignored by finance?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. I think part of it is we were sort of put in a box. And we talked about, finance's changing role. So I'll take a different angle here. I'm not suggesting that finance is just a bunch of, hate to use these words, but dorks, sitting in the corner and unable to partner with the rest of the business and that we kind of burst into flames at the first mention of culture. I think we've always worked to establish responsibility around expenses, inquisitiveness, reporting and analysis. And look, you can draw a straight line through values, structure, and commitment with that role, but that role in culture is a bit limited. It's kind of playing the cop, and it ignores the needs and the motivations of the wider business. At Host, when a budget owner comes to finance with a spend request outside of budget, our assigned business partner doesn't say, sorry, but we need to stay within budget, because we have values of empowerment and collaboration. Instead, we say, let me help you build out the business case, and then we'll try to find room in your budget for that data center or whatever it might be. I think that's a bit of an oblique way of answering that. I think one of it is our role was more limited and it has evolved. And the second is, I think the conversation in finance has evolved along with that. And the conversation in finance now, it's not weird or inappropriate or considered inefficient for us to talk about things as important as culture that slice across the business and produce linkages to outcomes.
Such a good point, Dan. And I know too, even just the role of the CFO has changed so much, and who reports into that CFO and whatnot. The role is not that back office anymore. It's really handling so many things. So absolutely. One more. Why is culture important now? What do you think has changed for finance or business that now makes culture so critical for the office of finance?
Sure. This is pretty related to the last one and a lot of what we've echoed today. But just to summarize it, it's probably a good ending place here. The world is faster. We all know this. It's more dynamic. It's more competitive. And culture acts as a glue for the core purpose of the org in this complex and fast-paced environment. It is the single thing other than capital that touches all areas of the business. And the workforce is also more interested in culture and more transient. How do you recruit? How do you train and retain if you can't speak to your own culture? I mean, that example I gave of being unable to explain what the business's purpose is in the elevator, what if that elevator was, a mid-level recruit who was coming in to interview for a VP level, and immediately that's going to look silly, especially if that person is in one of the softer sides of the business. You don't know what you all show up to do every day, and then they go across the street to your competitor for an interview, and they come in with a crystal clear vision of what they're trying to achieve and what that means for outcomes, how they're going to get to double, triple the size they are now, and how their culture and their values are going to help get them there.
Yeah, I absolutely think that people want to know what their purpose is, right? Great answers, great answers. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. I am so sure you've given people something to think about. I know you have, and we appreciate that. I will say to everyone, if you have any questions after this, the information to get in touch with Dan or host is up on the screen right now, so please do that. I do have one more question, I think, so just one second. So somebody just said excellent, so that's very good. We love to hear good feedback. Thank you for that. So excellent web.
My favorite kind of question.
Yes, absolutely. So at this time, I'm going to say this does conclude our presentation on 5 steps to partner with your organization to alleviate your finance pains. Again, thank you for joining us. I do absolutely recommend reaching out if you have any questions. I'm sure you'll get some good answers. And with that, I'm going to say again, Dan, thank you so much. And to everyone on the webcast, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. And this does conclude the webcast.